Let me ask you back to the question of God, and a big ridiculous question: who's God?
Who is God? So I'm going to use sort of the Aquinas formulation of what God is, right? That if there is a cause of all things, not physical things, if there is a cause underlying the reason of the universe, then that is the thing we call God. So not a big guy in the sky with a beard, like he is the force underlying the logic of the universe, if there is a logic to the universe, and he is the creator in the Judaic view of that universe, and he does have an interest in us living in accordance with the laws of the universe that, if you're a religious Jew, are encoded in the Torah, but if you're not a religious Jew, it would be encoded in the natural law by sort of Catholic theology.
Why do you think God created the universe? Or as popularly asked, what do you think is the meaning behind it? What's the meaning of life?
What's the meaning of life? So I think that the meaning of life is to fulfill what God made you to do, and that is a series of roles. I think that human beings, and here you have to look to sort of human nature rather than looking kind of to big questions. I've evolved something that I've really been working on, and I'm writing a book about this actually, that I call colloquially role theory. And basically the idea is that the way that we interact with the world is through a series of roles. And those are also the things we find most important and most implementable. Right? There's sort of virtue ethics, right, which suggests that if we act in accordance with virtue, like Aristotle, then we will be living the most fulfilled and meaningful life. And then you have sort of deontological ethics, like Kantian ethics, that it's a rule-based ethic. If you follow the rules, then you'll find the meaning of life. And then what I'm proposing is that there's something that I would call role ethics, which is there are a series of roles that we play across our lives, which are also the things that we tend to put on our tombstones and find the most meaningful. So when you go to a cemetery, you can see what people found the most meaningful because it's the stuff they put on the stone that has like 4 words on it, right? Like beloved father, beloved mother, sister, brother. And you might have a job once in a while, a creator, a religious person, right? These are all roles that have existed across societies and across humanity. And those are the things where we actually find meaning. And the way that we navigate those roles brings us meaning. And I think that God created us in order to fulfill those roles for purposes that I can't begin to understand because I ain't him. And the more we recognize those roles and the more we live those roles, and then we can express freedom within those roles. I think that the liberty exists inside each of those roles, and that's what makes all of our lives different and fun. We all parent in different ways, but being a parent is a meaningful role. We all have spouses, but how you interact that relationship is what makes your life meaningful and interesting. And that is what we were put on earth to do. And if we perform those roles properly, and those roles do include things like being a creator, like we have a creative instinct as human beings, being a creator, or being an innovator, being a defender of your family, being somebody who builds up, being a social member of your community, which is something that we're built to do. If we fulfill those roles properly, then we will have made the world a better place than we inherited it. And we will also have had the joy of experiencing the sort of flow they talk about in psychology, where when you engage in these roles, you actually do feel a flow.
So these roles are a fundamental part of the human condition.
Yes.
So the book you're working on is constructing a system to help us understand.
It's looking
roles.
at, let's assume that all of that's true. The real question of the book is, how do you construct a flourishing and useful society and politics?
So it's a society level. If this is our understanding of a human being, how do we construct a good society?
Right, exactly. Because I think that a lot of political theory is right now based in either J.S. Mill kind of thought, which is all that a good politics does allows you to wave your hand around until you hit somebody in the face, or Rawlsian thought, which is what if we constructed society in order to achieve the most for the least, essentially? What if we constructed society around what actually makes humans the most fulfilled, and that is the fulfillment of these particular roles? And where does liberty come into that, right? How do you avoid the idea of a tyranny in that? Right? How do you have to be a mother, you must be a father, you must be where does freedom come into that? Can you reject those roles totally as a society and be okay? The answer probably is not. So you need a society that actually promotes and protects those roles, but also protects the freedom inside those roles. And that raises a more fundamental question of what exactly liberty is for. And I think that both the right and the left actually tend to make a mistake when they discuss liberty. The left tends to think that liberty is an ultimate good, that simple choice makes a bad thing good, which is not true. And I think the right talks about liberty in almost the same terms sometimes. And I think that's not true either. The question is whether liberty is of inherent value or instrumental value. Is liberty good in and of itself, or is liberty good because it allows you to achieve X, Y, or Z? And I've thought about this one a lot, and I tend to come down on the latter side of the aisle. I mean, this is, you asked me areas where I moved. This may be an area where I've moved. Is that I think when you think more shallowly about politics, or maybe more quickly, because this is how we talk in America, is about liberties and rights, we tend to think that the right is what make, not like the political right, rights make things good, liberties make things good. The question really is, what are those rights and liberties for? Yeah. Now, you have to be careful so that doesn't shade into tyranny, right? You can only have liberty to do the thing that I say that you can do. But there have to be spheres of liberty that are roiling and interesting and filled with debate, but without threatening the chief institutions that surround those liberties. Because if you destroy the institutions, the liberties will go too. And if you knock down the pillars of the society, the liberties that are on top of those pillars are going to collapse. And I think that's, if people are feeling as though we're on the verge of tyranny, I think that's why.
This is fascinating, by the way. It's an instrumental perspective on liberty. That's going to have to give me a lot to think about. Let me ask a personal question. Was there ever a time that you had a crisis of faith where you questioned your belief in God?
Sure. And I would less call it a crisis of faith than an ongoing question of faith, which I think is, I hope, most religious people. And the word Israel, right, in Hebrew, Yisrael, means to struggle with God. That's literally what the word means. And so the idea of struggling with God, right, or if you're Jewish, you're B'nai Yisrael, right, the idea of struggling with God, I think, is endemic to the human condition. If you understand what God's doing, then I think you're wrong. And if you think that question doesn't matter, then I think you're also wrong. I think that God is a very necessary hypothesis.
So the struggle with God is life. That is the process of life.
That's right. Because you're never going to get to that answer. Otherwise, you're God and you aren't. So
why does God allow cruelty and suffering in the world? One of the tough questions.
So we're going deep here. There's two types of cruelty and suffering. So if we're talking about human cruelty and suffering, because God does not intervene to prevent people from exercising their free will, because to do so would be to deprive human beings of the choice that makes them human. Right? This is the sin of the Garden of Eden, basically, is that God could make you an angel, in which case you wouldn't have the choice to do the wrong thing. But so long as we are going to allow for cause and effect in a universe shaped by your choice, cruelty and evil are going to exist. And then there's the question of just the natural cruelty and vicissitudes of life. And the answer there is, I think that God obscures himself. I think that if God were to appear in all of his glory to people on a regular basis, I think that would make faith, you wouldn't need it. There'd be no such thing as faith, right? It would just be reality, right? Nobody has to prove to you that the sun rises every day. But if God is to allow us the choice to believe in him, which is the ultimate choice from a religious point of view, then he's going to have to obscure himself behind tragedy and horror and all those other things. I mean, this is a fairly well-known Kabbalistic concept called Tzimtzum in Judaism, which is the idea that when God created the universe, he sort of withdrew in order to make space for all of these things to happen.
So God doesn't have an instrumental perspective on liberty.
In a chief sense, he does, because the best use of liberty is going to be belief in him. And you can misuse your liberty, right? There will be consequences if you believe in an afterlife, or if you believe in sort of a generalized, better version of life led by faith, then liberty does have a purpose. But he also believes that you have to give people, from a cosmic perspective, the liberty to do wrong without threatening all the institutions of society. I mean, that's why it does say in the Bible that if man sheds blood, by man shall his blood be shed, right? There are punishments that are in biblical thought for doing things that are wrong.
So for a human being who lacks the faith in God, so if you're an atheist, can you still be a good person?
Of course, 100%. And there are a lot of religious people who are crappy people.
How do we understand that tension?
Well, from a religious perspective, what you would say is that it is perfectly plausible to live in accordance with a set of rules that don't damage other people without believing in God. You just might be understanding the reason for doing that wrong, is what a religious person would say. This is the conversation, again, that I had with Sam, basically, is you and I agree. I said this to Sam. You and I agree on nearly everything when it comes to morality. Like, we probably disagree on 15 to 20% of things. The other 80% is because you grew up in a Judeo-Christian society, and so do I, and we grew up 10 miles from each other, around the turn of the millennium. So there's that. So you can perfectly well be an atheist living a good, moral, decent life, because you can live a good, moral, decent life with regard to other people without believing in God. I don't think you can build a society on that, because I think that, that relies on the sort of goodness of mankind, natural goodness of mankind. I don't believe in the natural goodness of mankind.
You don't?
No. I believe that man is created both sinful and with the capacity for sin and the capacity for good.
But if you let them be on their own, doesn't it
without social institutions to shape them? I think that's very likely to go poorly.
Oh, interesting. Well, we came to something we disagree on, but that may be that might reflect itself in our approach to Twitter as well. I think if humans are left on their own, they tend towards good. They definitely have the capacity for good and evil, but when left on their own, I tend to believe they're good.
I think they might be good with limits. What I mean by that is that what the evidence, I think, tends to show is that human beings are quite tribal. So what you'll end up with is people who are good with their immediate family and maybe their immediate neighbors, and then when they're threatened by an outside tribe, then they kill everyone, which is sort of the history of civilization in the pre-civilizational era, which was a very violent time. Pre-civilizational era was quite violent.
Do you think, on the topic of tribalism in our modern world, what are the pros and cons of tribes? Is that something where we should try to outgrow as a civilization?
I don't think it's ever going to be possible to fully outgrow tribalism. I think it's a natural human condition to want to be with people who think like you or have a common set of beliefs. And I think trying to obliterate that in the name of a universalism likely leads to utopian results that have devastating consequences. Utopian sort of universalism has been failing every time it's tried, whether you're talking about, now it seems to be sort of a liberal universalism, which is being rejected by a huge number of people around the world in various different cultures, or whether you're talking about religious universalism, which typically comes with religious tyranny, or they're talking about communistic or Nazi-esque sort of universalism, which comes with mass slaughter. So this is, universalism I'm not a believer in. I think that you have, some values that are fairly limited that all human beings should hold in common, and that's pretty much it. Like, I think that everybody should have the ability to join with their own culture. I think how we define tribes is a different thing.
Yeah.
So I think that tribes should not be defined by innate physical characteristics, for example, because I think that, thank God, as a civilization, we've outgrown that. And I think that is a childish way to view the world. And all the tall people aren't a tribe. All the black people aren't. All the white people aren't a tribe.
So the tribes should be formed over ideas versus physical characteristics.
That's right. Which is why, actually, to go back to sort of the beginning of the conversation, when it comes to Jews, I'm not a big believer in ethnic Judaism. Right. I'm as a person who takes Judaism seriously, Judaism is more to me than you were born with a last name like Berg or Steen. And so I've made
Hitler
controversial.
would disagree with you, but
he would disagree with me, but that's because he was a tribalist, right? Who thought in racial terms. So
maybe robots will help us see humans as one tribe. Maybe that, as long
this
as
is Reagan's idea, right? Reagan said, "Well, if there's an alien invasion, then we'll all be on the same side. So I'll go over to the Soviets and we'll talk about it."
There's some deep truth to that. What does it mean to be a good man? The various role that a human being takes on in this role theory that you've spoken about. What does it mean to be good?
It means to perform. Now I will do Aristotle. It means to perform the function well. Right? What Aristotle says is the good is not like moral good, moral evil, in the way that we tend to think about it. He meant that a good cup holds liquid, right? A good spoon holds soup. It means that like a thing that is broken can't hold those things, right? So The idea of being a good person means that you are fulfilling the function for which you were made. Mm-hmm. It's a teleological view of humanity. So if you're a good father, this means that you are bringing up your child in durable values that is going to bring them up healthy, capable of protecting themselves and passing on the traditional wisdom of the ages to future generations while allowing for the capacity for innovation. That'd be being a good father. Right? Being a good spouse would mean protecting and unifying with your spouse and building a safe family and a place to raise children. Being a good citizen of your community means protecting the fellow citizens of your community while incentivizing them to build for themselves. And it becomes actually much easier to think of how to. This is why I like the role theory, because it's very hard, since sort of in virtue theory, to say be generous. Okay, how does that manifest? I don't know what that looks like. Sometimes being generous might be being not generous to other people, right? when Aristotle says that you should be benevolent, like what does that mean? This is very vague. When I say be a good dad, most people sort of have a gut level understanding of what it means to be a good dad. And mostly what they have a gut level understanding of what it means to really be a really bad dad. And so what it means to be a good man is to fulfill those roles, as many of them as you can, properly and at full function. And that's a very hard job. And I've said before that, because I engage a lot with the public and all of this, the word great comes up a lot. What does it take to be a great leader? What does it take to be a great person? And I've always said to people, it's actually fairly easy to be great. It's very difficult to be good. There are a lot of very great people who are not very good, and there are not a lot of good people. And most of them, frankly, most good people die mourned by their family and friends, and 2 generations later, they're forgotten. But those are the people who incrementally move the ball forward in the world, sometimes much more than the people who are considered great.
Understand the role in your life that involves being a cup and be damn good at it.
Exactly. That's right.
Hold the soup. It's very
Jordan Peterson have been there. Yeah,
it's very like Lobster with Jordan Peterson.
Exactly.
I think people will quote you for years and years to come on that. What advice would you give? A lot of young people look up to you. What advice, despite their better judgment? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just
maybe
only kidding. Only kidding. They seriously look up to you and draw inspiration from your ideas, from your bold thinking. What advice would you give to them? How to live a life worth living? How to have a career they can be proud of, and everything like that.
So live out the values that you think are really important and seek those values in others would be the first piece of advice. Second piece of advice, don't go on Twitter until you're 26.
And 26?
Because your brain is fully developed at that point. As I said early on, I was on social media and writing columns from the time I was 17. It was a great opportunity, and as it turns out, a great temptation to say enormous numbers of stupid things when you're young. I mean, you're kind of trying out ideas, and you're putting them on, you're taking them off, and social media permanentizes those things and engraves them in stone, and then that's used against you for the rest of your life. So I tell young people this all the time. Like, if you want to be on social media, but don't post. Like, watch. If you want to take in information, and more importantly, you should read books. As far as other advice, I'd say engage in your community. There's no substitute for engaging in your community. And engage in interpersonal action, because that will soften you and make you a better person. I've become a better person since I got married. I've become an even better person since I've had kids. So you can imagine how terrible I was before all these things. And engaging your community does allow you to build the things that matter on the most local possible level. I mean, the outcome, by the way, of the sort of politics of fulfillment that I was talking about earlier is a lot of localism, because the roles that I'm talking about are largely local roles. So that stuff has to be protected locally. I think we focus way too much in this country and others on like world-beating solutions, national solutions that apply to hundreds of millions of people. How do we get to the solutions that apply for like 5? And then we get to the solutions that apply to like 20. And then we get to the solutions that involve 200 people or 1,000 people. Let's solve that stuff. And I think the solutions at the higher level flow bottom up, not top down.
What about mentors and maybe role models? Have you had a mentor, or maybe people you look up to, either you interacted on a local scale, like you actually knew them, or somebody you really looked up to?
For me, I'm very lucky. I grew up in a very solid 2-parent household. I'm extremely close with my parents. I've lived near my parents literally my entire life, with the exception of 3 years at law school. And like right now, they live a mile and a half from us. What'd
you learn about life from your parents and your father?
Oh man, so many things from my parents. That's
good and bad.
That's a hard one. I mean, I think the good stuff from my dad is that you should hold true to your values. He's very big on, you have values, those values are important, hold true to them.
Did you understand what your values are, what your principles are early on?
Fairly quickly, yeah. Yeah. And so, he was very big on that, which is why, for example, I get asked a lot in the Jewish community why I wear a kippah. And the answer is, it never occurred to me to take off the kippah. I always wore it. Why would I take it off at any point? That's the life that I want to live, and that's the way it is. So that was a big one from my dad. From my mom, practicality. My dad is more of a dreamer. My mom is much more practical. Mm-hmm. And so the sort of lessons that I learned from my dad are that you can have this sort of the counter lesson is that you can have a good idea, but if you don't have a plan for implementation, then it doesn't end up as reality. And I think actually he's learned that better over the course of his life too. But my dad. From the time I was very young, he wanted me to engage with other adults, and he wanted me to learn from other people. And one of his rules was, if he didn't know something, he would find somebody who he thought did know the thing for me to talk to. That was a big thing. So I'm very lucky. I have wonderful parents. As far as sort of other mentors, in terms of the media, Andrew Breitbart was a mentor. Andrew, obviously, he was kind of known in his latter days, I think, more for the militancy than when I was very close with him.
So for somebody like me who knows more about the militancy, can you tell me what makes him a great man?
What made Andrew great is that he engaged with everyone. I mean, everyone. So there are videos of him rollerblading down the boulevard, and people would be protesting, and he would literally like rollerblade up to them, and he would say, "Let's go to lunch together," and he would just do this. Like, that's actually who Andrew was.
What was the thinking behind that? Just
That's who he was. He was just garrulous. He was much more outgoing than I am. Actually, he was very warm with people. Like for me, yeah, I would say that with Andrew, I knew Andrew for, let's say, I met him when I was 16. He passed away when I would have been 28. So I knew Andrew for 10, 12 years, and people who met Andrew for about 10 minutes knew Andrew 99% as well as I knew Andrew. Because he was just all out front, like everything was out here, and he loved talking to people, he loved engaging with people, and so this made him a lot of fun and unpredictable and fun to watch and all of that. And then I think Twitter got to him. I think by Twitter is one of the lessons I learned from Andrew is the counter lesson, which is Twitter can poison you. Twitter can really wreck you. If you spend all day on Twitter reading the comments and getting angry at people who are talking about you, it becomes a very difficult life. And I think that in the last year of his life, Andrew got very caught up in that because of a series of sort of circumstances.
It can actually affect your mind. It can actually make you resentful, all that kind of stuff.
I tend to agree with that. So, but the lesson that I learned from Andrew is engage with everybody, take joy in sort of the mission that you're given. And you can't always fulfill that. Sometimes it's really rough and difficult. I'm not going to pretend that it's all fun and rainbows all the time, because it isn't. And some of the stuff that I have to cover, I don't like, and some of the things I have to say, I don't particularly like. Like that happens. But that's what I learned from Andrew. As far as sort of other mentors, I had some teachers when I was a kid who said things that stuck with me. I had a fourth grade teacher named Miss Giannetti who said, "Don't let potential be written on your tombstone," which is a pretty
that's a good line.
It's a great line, particularly to a fourth grader. But it was that was a guy. I had an 11th grade English teacher named Anthony Miller, who was terrific, really good writer. He'd studied with James Joyce at Trinity College in Dublin, and so he and I really got along, and he helped my writing a lot.